basically it deals with the choice the consumer makes while choosing a commodity. So there are various approaches to, there are various approaches to consumer behavior. So as far as different approaches are concerned, there mainly there are three approaches. So the first approach is the classical approach, which is also called the Marshallian approach. Basically, it is based on logic. So basically, as far as the economic subject is concerned, it is a behavioral science. So basically, it tries to analyze the behavior of economic agents. So under the classical theory, basically it analyzes the consumer behavior on the basis of logic. So the first one is the Marshallian. Marshallian approach, and the second approach is called the difference curve approach. Basically, it was mainly developed by Hicks. So and the third approach is basically developed by Samuelson. So it is also called Samuelson approach. So as far as the first approach is concerned, the first approach basically it as I have told you, it basically tries to analyze the behavior of the consumer on the basis of logic. So this approach is the oldest approach, but now this approach is outdated, although it is still being used. So first we will discuss the Marshallian approach, and second we will discuss the indifference curve approach. So as far as the indifference curve approach is concerned, the indifference curve approach is basically, it is more, you can see, it is considered to be more developed and more practical as compared to the Marshallian approach. And as far as the third approach is concerned, which is the Samuelson approach, basically Samuelson approach is, it is also called an empirical approach. So this is the third approach is the most advanced approach, but the very little work has been done in Samuelson approach, and that is why the majority of the consumer analysis is basically done using the indifference curve approach. Since the Marshallian approach is the first approach, we will first discuss the Marshallian approach. So as far as the Marshallian approach is concerned, it is based on certain assumptions. These assumptions are first, the first assumption is utility can be measured. Utility can be measured. This and that is why this approach is called a cardinal approach, which means that one can measure utility. Here in this case, there are two groups of economists. One group of economists led by Marshall believe that utility can be measured in terms of money. For example, if someone is basically drinking water, or someone is consuming a certain good, and if he or she is getting some satisfaction, then he can say that he is getting certain 50 rupees worth of utility. So that is you can see the first group of economists which was led by Marshall. So here also we can put the group of economists into two parts. One, basically, the economists led by Marshall and others, they believe that utility can be measured in terms of money. And the second group of economists, they believe that although in principle utility could be measured, but in reality utility cannot be measured, they basically advise that utility could be measured in terms of an imaginary unit which is called utility. So suppose if someone is consuming commodity and he is getting certain satisfaction, then he or she can clearly say he is getting 40 utils of satisfaction. So here, basically, the second group of economics, they believe that although in principle utility could be measured, but in reality it is quite difficult to measure the utility. So here we can say utility can be measured in terms of an imaginary unit, that is utility. Now, as far as the second assumption of the Marshallian approach is concerned, the second approach basically believes that the marginal utility of money is a constant. Since under the Marshallian approach, it is assumed that the utility can be measured, and so the second assumption is crucial for this approach. So the second assumption is marginal utility of money is a constant. So this basically the second assumption, as I have told you, this one is the crucial assumption, because the whole approach assumes that the utility can be measured, and since in this approach money acts as a measuring rod, so that is why the measuring rod should be taken to be constant, and that is why one can measure the satisfaction in relation to that measuring rod. Now the third major assumption of the Marshallian approach is that the utility from different commodities can be added. That means, so here the third assumption is utility from different goods can be added. So here in the third assumption, basically we are assuming that the different commodities are not related, they are independent of each other. All the three assumptions I have mentioned, they are basically now not considered to be more practical. So basically, as far as the first one is concerned, now it is fairly established that utility cannot be measured whether in terms of money or in terms of any imaginary unit. Now, as far as the second assumption is concerned, that is the marginal utility of money is a constant. This assumption, although is crucial for this approach, because money acts as a measuring rod, but the main problem with this assumption is that when you will take the marginal utility of money as a constant, then in that case, basically one cannot differentiate between some of the classes of commodities, like the inferior commodity and the given commodity. So this is one of the one can say the demerits or weakness of this approach. Now the second assumption that commodities are independent and they can be added. Basically, it tries to rule out those commodities which are related, such as substitute goods and complementary goods. In reality, we know that the both types of goods exist, and in those cases, utility, whether you are consuming one commodity at a time or you are consuming both commodity, that basically affects your overall utility. So this assumption that the utility from different commodities can be added, or the utilities from different commodities are independent of each other, that is also not true. So this assumptions and that is why the Marshallese approach, although it is the oldest approach, but this approach is not, you can say, much in use right now, because the assumptions of this approach are considered to be more restrictive. And as we will show in course of this lecture, that this approach is able to explain too little but by assuming too restrictive assumptions. So we will start with the one fact, that the first one is the dam and water paradox, and then we will start with the law of diminishing marginal utility. So now, as far as marginal utility is concerned, the marginal utility is the change in total utility brought about by a unit change in the consumption of a commodity. So one can write the marginal utility can be mathematically expressed as delta tu upon delta x. The marginal utility, basically it represents the intensity of desire for a commodity. So higher the intensity of desire, higher will be the marginal utility. Lower the intensity of desire, lower will be the marginal utility. There is an important law, that is law of diminishing marginal utility, which states that if a consumer is consuming a commodity and it keeps on increasing the consumption of that commodity, then the total utility keeps on increasing, but it increases at the decreasing rate, which, in other words, one can say that the marginal utility derived from different units of the commodity keeps on declining. In other words, it can also be restated as the marginal utility from the consumption of successive unit of a commodity keeps on continuously declining, and that is due to the fact that with the increase in the consumption of a commodity, the intensity of desire for that commodity keeps on declining, because if someone has started consuming one commodity, initially the intensity of desire is the highest, but with the increase in the consumption, although his total utility increases, total satisfaction increases, but the marginal utility from successive unit of a commodity, that basically keeps on declining. We can graphically put this thing on the x-axis. We are taking good x, and on the y-axis we are taking the total utility derived from the consumption of commodity x. As you can see, this total utility curve, it basically increases and it achieves its maximum highest point, and then it starts declining. So as far as the corresponding marginal utility is concerned, the marginal utility, we can derive the marginal utility curve just below this graph. Again, here on the x-axis we will take root x, and on y-axis we will take marginal utility. So here what we will do, the point at which the total utility is maximum, the corresponding point on the marginal utility curve will basically touch the x-axis, because corresponding to the point the marginal utility of the consumer will become 0. So we can derive the marginal utility curve as a declining curve, which says that, which simply represents the fact that if a consumer is increasing the consumption of a commodity, although the total utility is increasing, but it is increasing at the decreasing rate. So as far as the total utility is basically increasing, the marginal utility will be positive, but it will be declining. The point at which the total utility becomes maximum, the marginal utility at that point will be 0. And beyond that point, if a consumer continues to consume a commodity, then the total utility starts declining. The moment the total utility starts declining, the marginal utility of the consumer becomes negative. And that is due to the fact that the point at which the consumer achieves his maximum satisfaction, beyond that point, it is basically the consumer is getting some disutility, and that is why his marginal utility, his or her marginal utility becomes negative. So as far as the marginal utility, law of diminishing marginal utility is concerned, we can say that if the consumer, other things remaining the same, if the consumer keeps on increasing the consumption of a commodity, then the total utility increases, but increases at a decreasing rate. Although the total utility is increasing, but the marginal utility is declining. That also means that the marginal utility derived from the successive unit of a commodity keeps on declining, and the point at which the total utility becomes maximum, or it is highest, the corresponding point sorry, on the marginal utility is a 0. Basically, it intersects the x-axis, and at that point the marginal utility is a 0. And beyond that point, the marginal utility becomes negative, and the corresponding intersection of the total utility curve basically is a declining. So as far as the law of diminishing marginal utility is concerned, it is an important, we can say, law which says that, which basically really try to explain the consumer's behavior on the basis of logic. Here, one should know the fact that the consumption of the successive unit of a commodity, the time period between the two units of the commodity should not be too long, because in that case this law may not hold. So basically this should be continuous, okay, then this law holds. Now based on this law of diminishing marginal utility, this approach, the Marcellian approach, tries to explain the damp water paradox. Now as far as the total utility is concerned, we can represent the marginal utility by also mathematically. So marginal utility of commodity X of nth unit of a commodity could be written as total utility of commodity X derived from n units of the commodity minus the total utility of commodity X derived from n minus 1 units of the commodity. So one can express the marginal utility in terms of equation also. You can also put the total utility in terms of marginal utility. So the total utility derived from the n units of the commodity can be expressed as n x from 1 n x to n x n. So here basically what does this equation imply? This equation implies that the total utility derived from n units of commodity X is equal to the sum of the marginal utilities derived from each of the commodity, and by adding those marginal utilities, one one can basically get the total utility derived from the elements of the commodity. Now we come to the question of dam and water paradox. This paradox was one of the, you can say, the initial questions that economists faced, and this approach was able to explain the dam and water paradox, which simply implies that the diamond, although it is not so important for life, but it commands a very high price. But on the other hand, water, which is precious to life, which is available almost free. So this paradox was explained by using the concept of marginal utility. So as far as the diamond water paradox is concerned, as I told you, diamond water paradox tries to explain the fact that why diamond, although it is not so uh, essential for life, but it commands a very high price. On the other hand, water, which is precious to life, one cannot survive without water, even for a few hours, but it is available almost free. So this the diamond water paradox can be explained on the basis of the concept of marginal utility. So as far as this paradox is concerned, it basically tries to claim that the diamond, which is available in very, you can see there is a relative scarcity of diamond, and due to this fact, the diamond commands a very high price. On the other hand, the water, the nature has given us water in plenty, and that is why we keep on consuming the water till its marginal utility basically declines to a very low level. So here one can put a graph in which one basically takes the marginal utility on the vertical axis and the quantity of diamond in water on the horizontal axis. Now, as far as the marginal utility for diamond in water is concerned, the marginal utility for diamond will be drawn to be a steep curve, and whereas the marginal utility for water could be drawn to be a relatively flatter curve. Basically the main reason why we have taken a steep curve for diamond and a relatively flatter curve for water is the fact that diamond, with the availability of diamond, the marginal utility or the intensity of desire for diamond declines very sharply. On the other hand, the water, since it is precious for life, so the marginal utility derived from water, it declines at a relatively slower rate. Now, as far as diamond is concerned, since the diamond is available in very small quantities, and that is why we can put the quantity of diamond available as a D0, whereas we can put the quantity of water available as something like W0. So we can see that the diamond, since the diamond is available only in a very small quantity, and that is why the marginal utility of the consumer from diamond is very high. If suppose the diamond is fairly available, it is basically available in plenty. In that case, the price of diamond will also fall. On the other hand, the water is basically available in plenty, and that is why the consumer keeps on consuming water till its marginal utility falls at a very low level, and that is why the water is available, the price of water is low. Now, as far as the present situation is concerned, since the water is becoming relatively scarcer, especially in the large cities, and that is why the price or now the pricing of water has started, and now it has become it is becoming more and more, you can see, the scarce commodity. So here in the graph, the marginal, we have the steeper curve is the marginal, the steeper curve is the marginal diamond curve, whereas the flatter curve is the marginal utility for water. Now, as we know that the marginal, the price and the marginal utility basically is the uh, level of the satisfaction that the consumer gets from the last unit of the commodity, whereas so the marginal utility basically represents the consumer's valuation, how much consumer values a particular commodity, and how much willingness on the part of the consumer to pay for that commodity. So higher the marginal utility derived from the consumer, the higher will be the price that the consumer will be willing to pay. The lower is the marginal utility derived from the a particular commodity, the lower will be the price. Here, the level of marginal utility depends on the, you can say, the quantity of that commodity available. So, if a particular commodity is available in large amounts, then the marginal utility derived from that commodity will be relatively lower, because the consumer can consume that commodity in larger amounts. And if, on the other hand, a commodity is available in small quantities, then the marginal utility, that is the utility derived from the last unit of the commodity, will be higher, and so the price basically that the consumer will be willing to pay for that commodity will be higher. Now, as far as the equilibrium is concerned, this basically, as far as the consumer's equilibrium is concerned, under Marshallese approach, consumer's equilibrium is explained for one commodity and for more than one commodity. So there are two cases for consumer's equilibrium. So consumer basically, as far as the equilibrium is concerned, it tries to achieve the maximum utility from the consumption of